All right, you guys, welcome to this episode of The Outrun Show. I'm Travis.
I'm Jesse.
I'm Justin.
And on today's episode, we're chatting about video games and the influence on parkour or parkour in video games. Storror's got a Kickstarter out for doing their own video game.
I'm not a fan of Kickstarters, but I'm proud of them. Yeah, go for it.
We'll support them. You guys should support them. I'm gonna try and support them for their video game project. We're gonna see where this goes. We want the opportunity in the community.
Yeah, you can be in a video game if that's been one of your major
Motivations,
goals in life. This is your chance.
Oh yeah, they'd probably be looking for motion capture talent. Well, I think they probably are the motion capture talent for that one.
Probably are.
Mm.
No, they have a reward system in there.
Ooh.
Yeah, if you drop like 150, you can be in the game.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Well, that's a cheap price.
That is a pretty cheap price for that kind of talent.
Ah, well, there we go.
Right,
Anyways.
there we go. Now you're in the game. All right. So there's a price on it. I like it. The economy. Parkour economy. We talk about sort of where that takes us with action movies, our inspirations, Hong Kong cinema, Jackie Chan's. Talk a little about Hollywood, some John Wick action, if you guys are John Wick fans. You can find out if we love or hate that type of thing. And then we talk a little bit about parkour's history and do we owe some nods to some of these media resources. Did parkour have digital founders? All that and more on this episode of The Outrun Show.
I don't like it either. I'll tell you, senioritis.
Oh, do you
it's
want
kicking
me
in
to-
on you.
Do you want me to do this too?
It's not the senioritis.
No,
I've
it's
never
senior-
liked it from the start.
Yeah, it's senioritis, but I mean, you never liked school from the start, but now it's getting like you see what could be.
You never liked school?
What? No.
In his example of like senioritis.
Yeah. So Jesse's getting senioritis for this gym right now. I haven't had
Oh no! Come
Oh.
on, you guys have known that I just don't like things from the start. I'm the inverse of everywhere. Where people are like, "Oh my god, this is so cool." I'm like, "That sucks. That's dumb." And then I go in reverse, and where I'm like, "Actually, it's pretty cool. I like that. That's pretty dope."
I just feel like senioritis like validates your reasons even more. So if you already had an excuse not to like something, the fact that it's almost over makes it even easier to hate it. Yes.
See, I heard you say senioritis, and I'm already getting older. I thought it was
tendinitis.
I was like, I was having trouble sitting. Is like, his I don't know, his hip flexibility or something, because he was complaining. I was like, you mean like senioritis, like elderly, like geriatric?
Geriatric.
I was like, but you mean like, oh, you're a senior in school and you're like tired. You're just tired of it.
He's
You're
talking about gym senioritis.
Yeah.
Like when you're moving to a new location, you know it's gonna be better. Like our new place.
I don't have it. Mine goes
This
the other
one, yeah.
direction, like him. Mine goes. I started thinking about it. Like last night, I stayed and trained alone until like.
You're never alone. Purple man. The purple man is always here.
The purple man is always here. But last night I stayed and trained alone until like after 9. No class was done at 7:30, and I stayed and trained alone because I was just like trying to soak it up and enjoy it.
I understand that. But that's the easy part. That's like if school's over and I just hung out in the middle of high school and jumped on over things, I could do that all day.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about the hard stuff, like sitting on these sushi rolls.
Like
When
not
I
enough
know-
room for the camera.
When I know there's some office chairs for me waiting, and a nice desk, and some windows.
Yeah.
Yeah, windows with mountain views. Where the views right now are metal. It's like X nightclub ceiling.
Yeah, we got 2 windows, and normally they're covered in spider
2
webs.
windows.
Yep.
2 ground floor windows.
Yep. Yep. Pretty tough to even emergency escape out of.
Yeah, no. I don't know if you can. You probably break them.
Mm-hmm.
They fold in.
Mm-hmm.
But in the future, then we have the ability to see through all the new windows.
Yeah, I've been telling parents that because when we close our mezzanine again, I was like, the new gym will have glass garage doors, so you'll be out there, but you can still see in. And all of them were like, again, like some people were like, "Oh, awesome," and some people were like, "That's still rude." I'm like, "Yeah, I know." I'm sorry.
That's funny.
But yeah, I can't wait. It's gonna be great.
And certainly having natural light of some sort will help a ton. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And a desk with chairs instead of this.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm
Yeah,
sitting.
so I can pivot.
So we can spin.
Imagine all the things Travis would get mad at me for fidgeting.
For
He
fidgeting.
can get mad at you about everything.
You know, just get my own camera so that you can just stop showing my face when I'm fidgeting.
Yep, that's what's gonna have to happen.
And your own mic.
Colin's like, no.
Justin's fidget
Fidget
spinner.
corner. It's just your face. And you just do a weird.
Yeah, just put me picture in picture.
We should just get like a Justin,
The Justin
like a
cam.
counter for each episode. Like Justin gets up.
Oh, yeah.
Justin checks his phone. Ding.
Yeah, the Krillin own count.
Krillin own count. Yeah.
Yeah.
One
I
more
love
Justin fidgets count. That'd be hilarious.
Fidgety guy. So Storror has a video game that they're trying to kickstart.
Yes.
Did you watch the little intro video on it?
Yep, I did watch the intro. It feels definitely more like a sports game to me. Like when he showed I forgot his name. When he did that really big gap, the one he just did recently.
Colin?
What'd you say?
Colin?
And then he lands it, and then the people are cheering around him. Like that. That's obviously, it seems more like a skateboard game where you're in a gym and you're practicing just the moves. There's no story. Like sometimes I feel like, what was that skateboard game that came out really early on, and it was the crazy one. You would grind like all over the city, and you had missions
on Xbox. It was
yeah.
Jet Set.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
So
Jet
that's
Set
what I
was
was
great.
thinking. Like, and I think when people say parkour game, I think Mirror's Edge, where there's a story and there's more like sci-fi element to it. But this one seems like it's just going to be straight up like training parkour in a video game.
Yeah.
Which
Like
I'm
skate.
not quite sure. Yeah, like skate. I'm not quite sure that I would enjoy that as much.
So-
I definitely play video games for sci-fi elements, and not. I don't enjoy video games when I'm playing them and I can just do whatever I'm doing in real life. Definitely don't play football games or soccer games. So I'm interested in it,
I'm still not sure if it's going to be like first person perspective.
which I like better
You like first person?
for parkour.
For
Because
parkour?
Mirror's Edge, because if I'm comparing Mirror's Edge and Assassin's Creed, and I think about which one was the better parkour game, Mirror's Edge is. I think Mirror's
That
Edge
is
is the
true.
standard for
Yeah.
parkour games. Absolutely.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
It was very tight in terms of controls. So
I thought, although if I'm being honest, I think Dying Light might have edged it out a little bit.
really, it was third person. Did we played that? right?
Dying Light was first person. Yeah. Yeah, you have it. I
Okay.
think you played
Okay,
like
it's the
3
game we were
hours.
playing the other day where
Yeah,
we were
with
laughing
zombies.
quite a bit. Okay, yeah.
And you guys are running around at night trying to survive. Yeah. Yeah, no. I think Dying Light had better, like, it felt more parkour to me
Why?
than Mirror's Edge.
Like what about it?
Because like my biggest frustration in a parkour game is when I'm like trying to go for something and then my character does something completely inefficient. Like instead of jumping over a rail, they run up to the rail and then hop over, and I'm like, no, just hurdle the thing, right? And Dying Light being released 4-ish years after Mirror's Edge. Quite a while. Like the first one came out quite a while after Mirror's Edge, so they had a long time to refine those mechanics. There was like a window of time where if you'd hit the jump before the rail, you would go over. Mirror's Edge had the same mechanics, they just weren't as clean. That's all. But Mirror's Edge was a
I
fantastic
remember Mirror's Edge. You're like
control wise.
being able to tack off a rail, like a vertical rail in Mirror's Edge, and that was like the fastest route.
Yeah.
That's what I really like in Mirror's Edge. Like if you were quick, and it was definitely more PC game, but if you were quick enough, you could do very close things to what you saw people in real life doing.
Like, so based on what I saw
Have
from,
you not played Mirror's Edge?
I've watched it and
Okay,
played
you might
it.
have to play it because I'm sure it's
Yeah.
like $2 on
Oh,
Xbox
yeah.
Live. But it's worth it because it's like it's very simple. It's not like you don't like the games where have menus. They have a
There are
menu.
no
that's
menus.
Really tough for you.
Yeah, menus. Yeah, there's a lot going on. Throw
Travis
menu.
likes to like start the game, press Y, start shooting.
Yep. Or
Very
kicking.
simple. Yep.
Yeah, I'm definitely more of like as soon as there's like a story or something to read, I'm like, I'm out. Like, it's just.
So yeah, but I think it's cool. I think it's really cool that this because it's their. It looks like it's their initiative, right?
Yeah. So what I think they're doing, and I don't know, but it seems like based on what they were talking, is they were trying to sort of recreate some of their moments. And from a branding perspective, that's just really intelligent, right? Is to make iconic in a digital fashion what we already know is iconic in reality. Like, so if you look at like Manpower Gap, stuff like that, IMAX, these spots, right? Then we know those spots because of parkour videos. But would we know them more if you were younger and into the video game scene and you just played it? Like we all know digital landscapes pretty well. If someone came out and dropped like the Halo map and you could explore it, we would all recognize it. If someone built it in reality, you would know early Halo maps.
That just made me think of why didn't we just make our gym hang 'em high from Halo? We had the height. We could have just built a Halo map in this gym.
Because that walkway that spans the map is absolutely a liability.
Oh, yeah, at 60 feet in the air.
We might have time.
But the problem is we take fall damage. So
you did in Halo CE too. You did fall damage in CE.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is like, you know, that's sort of the game, right? Is to some degree understanding their different challenges. And if you even look at those gaps, that gap was the gap from the Roof Culture Asia, and it was the gap in Korea that they did. So that little sample was an actual spot. And what they said in the video is that you can do our challenges, you can do our time trials, you can do a lot of the iconic shots, right? So if you're a fan, the question is the fan base big enough to sort of live out in a digital scene the parkour experience of their content, right?
I think if I'm being honest, they do better not marketing to parkour people.
It seems like it worked there.
I mean, you'll get parkour people regardless that are going to be interested. Oh, Justin counter.
Click. Ding. Yeah.
You get parkour people interested anyways, just because they know. But when I think back to like Tony Hawk's like skate games, because that's really the best analogy of what this would be like. You can look up interviews that Tony did, and he'll be like, I didn't expect the game to take off at all. I expected to just be like, yeah, you know, some skaters would play it in their free time, it'd be fun, like whatever. And he was like, and then I got that first big check from EA, and he was like, it blew my mind. He's like, and then when we poured into the demographics of who was playing the game, the majority of people that played the game and liked the game weren't even skaters. They didn't even have an interest in skating. They just wanted to check out the game. And I think that's always where video games have existed, right? Video games aren't there to enhance who you think you are, though there are games like that. They're there to help you experience something you'll never get to experience, or you just don't want to invest the time to invest. Like, I would play, and I have played, like, you know, Tony Hawk's Underground, right?
Underground, that's the one I'm thinking of.
No, Jet Set was the crazy one. Underground wasn't that crazy.
Underground was the one where you could literally skateboard across you could jump the city almost, right?
Can you imagine
I think you
what
can do that in most of them, but
can you imagine what like a skate fan would have to say about that? Like, Justice Enthusiasm was that you could jump the city, and I'm sure like a skate fan would be like, "This is not even possible." What? Right? But like,
unfortunately, those guys don't. Yeah, they don't. I mean, having been in skate culture, that was never really like a thing they cared about.
Oh, okay.
At least speaking for me and my group of people. But yeah, so I think they'll find that their demographic of people who play the game aren't going to be parkour people for the reasons Justin said originally. We'll check it out because it's cool and it's in our industry. But will we be the biggest fans? Probably not. The biggest fans are going to be people who haven't done parkour, who enjoy the idea of it and want to experience it, you know, vicariously. Whereas we're going to be like, okay, I'm just going to go out and do it at this point, right?
Well, yeah, I do think there is an element where, because I'm never going to do the gaps on the top of a skyscraper. So that's kind of cool that it's like they're getting very close to the level of detail and realism, and that they did the jumps themselves. So I imagine that they're going to put some of that experience into the actual game mechanics. Yeah, so that's kind of interesting to me because I'm never going to do a jump like that. So to play it, you know, I think as video games get further along, especially with this new console series and PCs going where the resolution is just is blowing my mind. I don't know if I could play a game it doesn't look quite as finished and experience that in the way that I would like to, but I'll still give it a shot.
But also, if you look at like Explorer, the nature of exploration in video games, some people are into that. Like Candy, my wife, she doesn't like a lot of shooting and violence. She just likes to explore maps, and to me, that's just being lost, right?
So No Man's Sky is Candy's game.
Oh, really? Yeah. I don't know that game.
I'll buy it for her.
Okay. She does let to go look around in a map, and I'm just like, oh
you
my
get to travel space and go to planets and harvest materials.
She would love that. Just like chipping away at like some gem in the dirt or something. Like that's her thing. Like for me, it's like, but with parkour, you have such an opportunity on a gaming landscape it's like the physics change, right? Like what can a person do that's somewhat believable? And in video games, you're often suspending your ideas around physics or manipulating them. That's why I think skate works really well, is because you're on this board and we sort of, now our belief about what can happen in motion just goes away. Physics goes away. And you're like, oh, I imagine I'd skate there. And even though like physics don't work for skate, you don't understand skate physics that well. So you're just like, okay, cool. There's a tool. But this is just people. So I think a lot of the cool stuff could be like a first person VR perspective that was as close to real as possible of those roof gaps would be nuts.
Yeah.
It's going to have to be third person. You just can't appreciate the visuals of the sport if it's in first person.
Really?
So Mirror's Edge, think about Mirror's Edge. Mirror's Edge was like, it was a combative game, right? At its core. It was a movement-based combative game where you're fighting, but you're not really doing you're not doing flips, you're not doing these like crazy stylistic free running moves. You're doing purely utilitarian parkour, right? Where you're trying to get to a spot or something like that. And that can be experienced in a VR situation very well. But if you're doing a flip, if I'm in VR and my character flips and I'm not physically flipping, that's going to be awful for me.
Yeah,
and I've experienced flipping. So what are you going to do with the visuals? Are you going to see the ground rotate? Because that's not what you do in an actual flip, right? Like most of the time you blink and the flip's over. So
what if you did it in third person? Like you're playing
during
the
character.
Flip. Yeah, and then if you achieve if you stick the landing, if you unlock the challenge, then it does that's a first person perspective of the jump when you finish it.
I could see it being like a combat finisher where if you hit the button presses correctly, then it goes into third person for that sequence and then goes back into first person. That's something, but it's gonna have third person elements.
Well, I mean primarily first person, but then third person, but then goes to first person to experience the success of the jump.
So you hit the jump and then it goes back into first person.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually it'd be kind of cool if you did the game, which is obviously not going to look that real. I mean, we're gonna get close. I would be surprised if it looked, you just know, gameplay.
It's an independent dev team, and
the
budget's not going to be a AAA title, so yeah, I mean.
But if you got the POV cam shot inside, even if they just treat the video in a way that makes it look a little less real, but is the original GoPro footage from POV that you see when you unlock the technique, it kind of brings you back into reality, and it's like, oh wow, this really happened. And if you're playing the game, you're like, okay, I'm jumping over a building, blah, blah, blah. But you don't realize that someone did it.
Yeah, it could be kind of cool if they
wove content in like that.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
They really should. That'd be pretty crazy.
That'd be awesome.
Because then people who didn't know that these stunts were performed in real life,
right,
could get that hint.
Because if you know the content, I can already spot I've seen them do that. I've seen that content there. But if you're just playing it, like you're saying, considering a lot of these people would just be like, oh, there's a new parkour video game and it's like real parkour. It's like in martial arts, there used to be like that. Oh, there's a fighting game or there's a fighting movie and it's like real fighting. We all understood there were still some rules.
Yeah.
Or like people with MMA. MMA is real fighting. It's much closer than a lot of things, but
still not real.
It's not real in what you're imagining. This is the upper limit of what could happen in any scenario when it's not war, right? So it's kind of like it's
both. We reasonably suspect that both parties will walk alive out of the ring.
Yeah,
that's why it's
they're those objectives aren't as violent. So then knowing, oh my gosh, I'm playing something, and then if you unlock the Easter egg is that you experience or see the actual jump, and that could pull people back and forth into the content, which I think is pretty cool.
That would be pretty cool.
So I think that the difference is in going out and making a game that's supposed to represent parkour and being inspired by content like movies and action cinema and those sort of witnessing videos that people have actually recorded are like coming from two different perspectives, and that's why it may or may not work, because now we're in this situation where we're like taking what we do and then we're trying to do it in a video game versus seeing someone do something and then trying to do it in reality. So it's flipped. And so I want to talk about what we've seen before and how that's influenced what we do in reality. Now that we've talked a little bit about wanting to do something and then doing it digitally and in a video game. So what have you guys seen before? My sort of jarring proclamation was, I don't think that parkour could exist without action cinema.
The way it is today.
Yeah.
The way it's practiced today.
The way it's practiced. I don't think parkour...
And by action cinema, you're including like early YouTube videos. And that
Yeah, I
content,
mean, I
or
would even...
specifically cinema.
I would go as far back as like 70s, probably like Hong Kong cinema, and then everything from there all the way up through today.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, of course, it's been shaped by what people have been able to visually see in terms of how it's spread, but I can't think of anything that I've watched and then been like, oh my gosh, I want to go out and do that, like that thing, that exact same thing. I've always taken the emotional spirit of something. Like, of course, I grew up watching like Jackie Chan films, and Jet Li films, and being really inspired by the athleticism that I've seen there. But I've never been out there and been like, oh my gosh, like what he did in that specific scene, I want to go out and try there and like grab a ladder and try and dive through the ladder and then carry it, spin it around and knock a couple of people out.
That's
right. Like I've never wanted to try those specific things, but I've definitely taken the energy and the emotional like charge that I've got from watching that and channeled it into my practice. But I don't, and this is maybe more me personally, but I don't think I've ever, that's biting. I try not to bite. You know?
Oh, you feel like that was
a little bite.
a little bite?
Yeah,
Oh, that's
to
right.
be like, see somebody go do something and then be like, oh, I'm going to go do that same thing. And then like film it and post it and try it. Yeah, that felt a little disingenuous to me.
Yeah, that's because I know I did this with dance. Because I did, it was parkour first. We were doing parkour like every other kid was doing parkour before we knew what it was. And then dance got thrown in there because somehow along the line Jesse and I were learning breakdancing moves early on in elementary school, and to learn those moves I would just copy YouTube videos. There was multiple there's like a dance series on YouTube that was from the guys who made oh man, I'm forgetting, Channing Tatum's dance movie Step Up. The choreographers for those made a YouTube playlist, and so I remember watching those and copying a lot of the dance moves from there, and I would directly mimic it. But for parkour, I feel like there's only a couple times where I really saw someone do something and I wanted to do it. So that was, Kong Gainer from Daniel Lebach when he first did it. I remember learning Trinity flip. So Trinity from The Matrix, her flip off the wall while she's shooting upside down. I remember trying to learn that flip in parkour classes.
She goes sideways on that one?
Yeah, she takes the opposite foot across and then steps the nearest wall or the nearest leg
like
to the wall.
Wall GMS.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
like
she's
wall
going
GMS.
this way along the wall,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And flips.
So
So
there,
you
so
wall
that
GMS with automatic guns.
yes. So in that context, I
Right
do
front.
see it, but I could only pinpoint it a couple times. I remember the first tunnel flip from 3 run. So I remember practicing that one. So very specific moves I can remember, but in terms of like practicing parkour, I feel like a lot of parkour back, before 2013 was like trying to invent your own move so that other people would copy it. Like it was always trying to be more original, and I feel like that felt more like if I was an actual b-boy. Because I feel like that's what they practice now, is trying to be really original
instead of just copy. Right?
Yeah.
You're trying to do something new. I asked Izzy, who's our b-boy coach, the other day. I was like, okay, what does b-boy value more, originality or being clean, like the ability to like copy what someone else is doing and make it like perfect from there, or the ability to invent something new. And there's a cultural difference there around innovation that I think really we see the innovation piece come from the West. So when we look at like Jackie Chan stuff, a lot of what made him special was that he was taking essentially what was the Beijing opera stuff, and then in a movie environment, including that in like chase scenes, right? So he's improvising that, and so many people have pointed this out, but I think it's coming up as a topic again or whatnot. But the inspiration to do those things, it's like we're another layer back to some degree, because parkour's already got momentum at this point, right? So like parkour's already happening. There's a culture. We know it has a name. We know what it is. And then you're like, okay, I'm watching other parkour people, and I'm going to try and do their moves. And then I may or may not. I don't think that's coming from movies, or I don't think that's coming from cinema, or whatever places for inspiration. I'm already looking at them. But that's after the culture is established, right? And a lot of these people are going and drawing inspiration from other places in the early creation of it. So but the premise I was trying to make was that I don't think that without essentially Hollywood and like Hong Kong cinema, you could have it.
Really, Hollywood? I don't really feel like I've seen anything in Hollywood that
I haven't.
But that was
I'm willing to go out and say I haven't seen anything.
Yeah, that I've seen in Hollywood that I want to do, like that makes you want to do it.
That, yeah, in terms of parkour that I've seen, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's so original. In fact, I'm like, well, you're about 4 years late on doing that.
I think the only one that would come close would be Casino Royale.
That OG chasing.
Yeah, but there's not a move in there where I was like, oh, I need to go train that move.
But that is, in fact, I would wager that's one of the most authentic representations of parkour we've seen in Hollywood media, right? Yeah. Like the elevator like shaft jump that he does, where he hits the like concrete lip. Yeah. Before the elevator's finished, where he goes from one floor, hits that, and then like essentially plyos down to the next level. That's so legit.
Right, 'cause he slides off of it.
Yeah, and it's so legit, and everything about that chase scene was authentic. Whereas I feel like every time I watch Hollywood, and it's just the nature of film, that it needs to be more expressive and a little bit more gimmicky to draw attention, and that's fine. I have nothing against that, but it's not like that's not parkour, right? But when I watched that scene, it was like, oh my gosh, this is like if you were to do that exact same stunt, it would look exactly like that. Mm-hmm. There's no wires. There's no like he jumps and somehow he like it's a Marvel movie or something like that. So I've always felt like Hollywood's been a bit behind when it comes to stunts.
Absolutely.
As to what parkour athletes can do versus what they represent. Like I feel like 3/4 of what was in the stunt works for the Marvel movies could have just been a parkour athlete or a tricking athlete, right?
And it may have been, but then nerfed for the shot.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is they'll hire amazing athletes and then they'll wire harness them. And I'm like, why? Just let him do his thing. It looks more authentic anyways. And they're like, because he needs to fly 10 feet in the air.
Yeah, if you even look at, what is it,
Underground.
6 Underground. They wired up the Storror guys, case in point, right? Like, they didn't need to, but for liability reasons, they wire it. Some of those shots, I think maybe even I would have wanted. Obviously I would have, but I think if I were them, I would have wanted something tied to me. But yeah, I could see it getting in the way, but for liability reasons, they're doing it. With Hollywood, I was thinking more of like, it was just Hollywood was taking from Hong Kong cinema the action stuff that was being produced, and they were the medium, the vessel to sort of get it into the West. I haven't seen a ton of innovation on the Hollywood scene that comes anywhere near like something that
like when you think about like early Hollywood cinema, it's definitely more like your James Bond shooting. It's not this like
blow up a car.
Yeah, it's like it's more gun and and more like this traditional Western fighting, right? Whereas like they're not actually interacting with each other physically. It's like they're shooting at each other, and he shoots his glasses off his face, and he's like, ha.
Yeah,
So
Hollywood is highly dependent on effects, acting, storyline.
Yeah, well, you just look at like what's that cowboy? John Wayne.
John
right?
Wayne.
You watch old John Wayne films; those are like your original like Hollywood action films, right? As far as they go, and Hong Kong cinema was very much like didn't have guns. It was definitely more combatives, right? So I do like that we've essentially now we have amazing films that are not kid appropriate, like John Wick, that have beautiful choreography and beautiful like just like weapon choreography that feels authentic, even though I know nobody. And John Wick would have died thousands of times in those
You
films.
were just making this correlation, but when you say John Wick in Hollywood, I just think John Woo in Hong Kong cinema. Because John Woo was
the
the
director.
I
guess they got into directing.
Right, but those films were the like John Wick style, gun choreo, and in some cases,
What were some of his movies?
I'd have to go back and look at them, but I remember watching them and just being like, oh, this is like gunfight choreography. Like a lot of that. And so Hollywood is notorious for just taking what's working in other places, diluting it, and then like reselling it, right? But yeah, so I'll look that up. I can't represent it really well right now, but when I think of the John Woo stuff, I think of, we're sort of like boom, 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 like they're shooting and there's like, there's like choreography, but it's gun choreography. And it's really good for when it was done. So I think there's something to be discovered there too. I guess the one of the observations I made recently is that oftentimes we're thinking about, when we think of the origins of parkour and what we train, we're thinking about method natural, we're talking about early David Bell stuff, Yamakaze, Sebastian Foucan, like those guys who are kind of called like the founders. And if we look at where they got their ideas, how they started training, we may not be doing that today. That may be like the third, fourth generations down, influenced by what other people are doing. But where did they get their ideas and where did they come up with those things? And when I read like Breaking the Jump, Julia Angel's book, there was like, they'd watch martial arts movies and they'd go out and imitate that training, doing parkour in the streets with the tools that they had, right? People would watch old Jackie Chan films. They see him, like, they get psyched out about it. Obviously, Jackie Chan was in our face doing doing tic-tacs for a very long time. Yeah. And so that move was there. It wasn't called parkour. We could say, oh, well, that's just Peking opera, Beijing opera, where like for hundreds of years they've been doing, back handsprings off of tables. But we weren't looking at that. The West wasn't looking at that. The founders of parkour weren't watching old videos of the Beijing opera. But Jackie Chan was presenting that through Hong Kong cinema. And the Shaw brothers were doing similar things with the older like styles too, where you would have flips and choreography and twists and things borrowed from wushu and acrobats in China, then presented in media. That's why I'm saying I think the film and the media stuff is so important. I think it's that plus the philosophies of Method Natural that are probably the biggest pillars and influence in the creation. I mean, we'd have to ask those guys to really be sure of that, but that's the observation I'm making, is I think we're downplaying how much influence is coming from movies, early movies, in what we create and what we practice.
I think, that in terms of talking about the founders, that makes a lot of sense, because I think we all know our own personal motivations, and we started practicing parkour before it was in Hollywood. So this was YouTube and David Bell, right? So
before YouTube, actually.
Yeah, and before YouTube.
You dinosaurs, you.
Yeah, I know. So in terms of us, or Jesse and I, in our generation of parkour, which I feel like is like the international jam generation, we was definitely more original and trying to create stuff. But if I were to think about where David Bell and these more the first generation of athletes got their inspiration from, I would be clueless. So I imagine then there is room for them to be inspired by.
We've seen it oscillate, where it's like it was originally these very well-known actors or actresses or stage actors or film actors that and then inspired other people, and now it's almost in the inverse, where you'll just find somebody in Madrid who just happens to be amazing, who's doing something cool, that then finds its way to film and cinema, right, or stage.
Back the other way.
Yeah, it goes back the other way. Whereas, and I think that's just because our methods of communication and media content sharing is so much faster than it used to be. It used to be your only content to consume was print or film, right, or stage, right? And so that's it. So naturally, yeah, if you were gonna get any sort of inspiration from like a physical thing, you had to go see somebody on stage doing this stuff, or you had to go see a film where somebody was doing that stuff. So it's the only way it could have spread, right? Because word of mouth and training is it's just not a very fast way. But now that we have so much media that can be pumped out immediately, film and cinema and stage can't keep up, because those have to be choreographed and filmed and laid out and planned. Right. Whereas these clips on Instagram they're just, somebody's like, I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to try it. Oh, cool. Post it. Boom. Done. And so now it's the inverse, which has always been my complaint about Hollywood stunts, is that they feel inauthentic. Right. Because I know what the front line looks like, and I feel like I'm looking at something that's, 5 years back.
When we would always watch Kung Fu movies, that would be this big complaint, is that we know what these people can do. You're not letting them do what they really can do.
Throttled, yeah.
Right, you're throttling it. And that's why certain artists like Donnie Yen, there was always the complaint between Jet Li and Jackie Chan about how Chan stuff was a little less martial and a little more like, comedy stagey stuff. But then on the Jet Li side, there was more martial, but there was wire work. Yep. And so there was that you like him for different reasons. And then Donnie Yen came along and it's very gritty, like fighty, almost like you would imagine MMA or you'd imagine real fights to be. Like a lot of his content was very gritty like that. And the same thing with Tony Jaa, like a little bit later, but comes in and his stuff is like really violent, very like in the weeds. Like there was a craving for that. Instead of like a lot of camera work, you just wanted to see him like run through stairs and like break 50 arms.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. That's why Justin knows. That's why I like the John Wick series. People were like, "Oh, those movies have no story. It was about a dog, and then he murders thousands of people for a dog." And I was like, "All right, well, I'm not a dog person, but like, I feel like you guys should be behind that anyways. Like, don't you guys like dogs?" But anyways, no, I like it because it feels like the choreography team was like, "What's just the craziest thing we can do? Let's just do it, and like let's just make a story that justifies it, and let's just do it." And they just went through it, and everybody's like, "Yeah, he would have died there and there and there," but it's just like nobody throttled him. They were just like, "Let's just go to the walls with this, everything that we think we can do, and make it look as good as we can."
And there's also like a bit of honesty in there, and that that not much of that is CGI, right?
There's like a couple of scenes where he like falls. There's like the ending scene where he falls down in the alley, and you're like dead.
Okay.
Well, someone did do that fall though.
It's true.
They did do that exact fall. So it was CGI,
but they were like pads
because they had mats and stuff. Like he took
it right.
However, how many feet that is, 40 feet or something. But
and our witness to that, the original witnesses to that type of action cinema was Jackie falling off of buildings, right?
And I almost feel like early cinema didn't have the budget to get wired up, so he was like, "I'm just gonna do it," because there's so many scenes of him like going for something and then like bashing himself up and then like having to come back the next day to try it because he's injured or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And so there's some honesty in there when you see that, and then when you see and that's why I think that the idea of being able to do that was probably put in people's heads. Like when you were watching it when you were younger, you knew Jackie did that. Like it was just like, we knew it. It was a rule, or just knew that was happening. When Jet Li, jumps up two buildings and he spins, it's really cool, but he didn't do a 2-story vertical, right? Mm-hmm. Like we understand, okay, for other reasons, I'm interested in him, the nitty gritty fighting stuff, right? But Jackie was out there doing stuff that you didn't think people could do, and that inspired you to do things. And so I think he's special in that way.
Hey, he's super special in that way.
I'm just saying, like, I think
because no one does what he does still. It's not like the skill level isn't there to match what Jackie does, but
some of it's time too, and that's why it's important. Is that he was doing that when it wasn't being done. Mm-hmm. It was new at that time. To do it now is still to copy. Just like to see someone do, like Ilabaka do a Kong Gainer, is to copy, even though that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Or to watch someone do cork prees right now is to copy, but it's almost still in that vein of like, we're gonna go out and do something physical that's crazy, and you're gonna see it happen, and it might inspire you to do it, right? That's still different. So all I want to do, I think, that is take time to recognize that parkour, I feel like, has a special relationship with like, I want to say media. This is like Cullen was complaining about this earlier. This is not the media like Fox News and CNN, but media like it, like b-boy parkour tricking are all special in that a lot of their origins and the inspiration for their content comes directly from having access to media. Like you weren't the one there training with Jackie, but you saw it and you could receive some of his style, and then you go and you do some stuff and you make something new. It's the same thing with like, breaking battles. The same thing with like people watching tricking moves, watching people like Jet Li and wushu athletes and sport karate dudes do stuff, and they take it and they do it. And I feel like we have a special relationship with the internet, especially in parkour, because of that.
I would say that we're one of the original sports that was birthed from the media generation. Right?
Yes.
Our sport absolutely would not, I don't want to say it wouldn't exist, but it certainly wouldn't exist.
No, it wouldn't. You're right.
In anything close to its capacity now without media content or the platforms that we currently have.
I kind of really feel like it was just waiting for that medium to appear, because I think about it, it's natural to move in the way that we do, to swing and to jump. So how it didn't get crystallized in any other culture until social media showed up. There is some sort of bond there that grew together.
Yeah,
because we have gymnastics, right, from the Greeks.
You have some, and you have acrobats
stuff, and they were doing long jump, and we have swinging from gymnastics, and we have circus.
We've had you can find tons of clips of like 1940s like
Yep.
circus acrobats or standalone like stage actors who did like pretty insane stuff, right? Who were doing like corks off of tables and landing on a chair and being like, oh, right? But there wasn't any media to be spread around, so nobody ever heard about that. So I do like that theory that it's like it's always been just sleeping, and finally we had a catalyst that allowed it to get to everybody in a short amount of time, so that it the people that were truly interested in it were actually able to engage and connect with it. Whereas before, there was just such a slight chance that you might come across it.
And so I would like to say, make this statement that is early in history. It was Nova's, and I just like was messing with it today, like Justin.
He's got a fidget.
But my fidgety thing doesn't make noise. Have you heard it? You've not heard it. I'm also not playing with it like
visually super loud.
It was visually super loud. I'm just hearing it through my eyes right now. It's just deafening. So what I want to say is that I think parkour is one of the first disciplines to have digital co-founders. Meaning our co-founders were human, but they weren't delivered by human means, right?
Yeah.
It's basically not AI, but you know what I mean? That's kind of like what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like you needed it. They needed to be taught like.
Well, and with the ability for people to connect with each other, having never met each other, but still be able to share content and share growth and progress and ideas is certainly something that led to parkour where it is now, right?
Because I was thinking about this really hard, and I was like, I always kind of, it's not a pet peeve, but I could kind of see where I would be like kind of a nerd, or some people would be a nerd in saying this, where they'd be like, well, actually, the first person to do a cork was in 500 BC and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, yeah, but we didn't see that. It probably was, right? I mean, we see examples of primates doing backflips for the fun of it. Like I've seen like monkeys do backflips just because it seemed like that's what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
Flyways
too, yeah.
Oh yeah, the flyway. Oh, and then this isn't even getting them gibbon foos, right? But that doesn't really translate to what we do today. What I'm looking for is like what was really something that we knew we could tie to the past, and that's where I'm just thinking like, really, it's like It's like probably David Bell being like listening to stories about his family and method natural and his idea of like method natural and applying it in modern terms and those philosophies, and then watching Shaw Brothers and Jackie Chan and getting inspired by martial arts to train in that way and to see how Jackie explores environments in that way. And earlier kung fu movies would have been like the Shaw Brothers stuff, where they were just like factory farming kung fu movies essentially. Like these people lived in this studio, like hundreds of actors, and they just woke up every day and their like boss was like, "You will make kung fu movies," and they sat and it's serious. They churn them out like it's literally like this. You watch these documentaries, it's hilarious. They literally, it's kind of like they get stuck in this studio.
Like the original film incubator.
Yes, it was a film incubator, and these guys are making pennies, and they're just like, you will make one movie a week or something like that, and you'll wake up and you'll shoot, and you'll reinvent the story. It was like that. And so, but those guys were doing the like kind of stunty, flippy, martial artsy stuff that someone would be like, oh man, I kind of want to flip off something, you know? And I recently found, and I don't know, I can't remember honestly if this was because I'd seen like David Bell's films or documentaries or not. I remember seeing it, and this may have had something to do with it, but because it was the holidays, and I was doing like do you guys watch National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation? Have you seen that movie before?
Yeah.
Yeah, Christmas Vacation? Right, yeah. It's a classic, right? And in that, he gets stuck in his attic, and he's watching old film, because he gets locked in his attic, so he's watching old film of his past or whatever. So I was doing the Christmas Vacation thing, digging through old like tapes, like high 8 tapes, right? And I found a video of me training a wall flip from 2002 or 3.
Nice.
So now I have early historical evidence of practicing, because this was not kung fu. You guys, eventually I'll show you the video. This was absolutely me practicing a wall flip, just as you would see it today. If you'd be like, that's what we were all trying to do back then. So I'm like wondering how much of the influence and the overlap is there, but the names weren't there for it. And then at what point do we start saying, well, this was parkour and this wasn't? I just think it's kind of pretentious and nerdy to go back and be like, well, the ancients were doing parkour. But we all have trouble with accepting that, right?
That they were?
Yeah.
No, I have no trouble with that.
No, I mean, like, they're doing parkour, but it's like, was that the same parkour that David Bell, Sebastian Picon and the Yamakasi promoted?
Yeah, I still have no problem saying that.
Okay.
I only have problems with people being like, "Oh, I used to do that when I was a kid," and I was like, "What? In the woods, Alabama?"
Yeah.
Yeah. There's
you
no
weren't
real
doing
proof.
parkour. You were just running through the bushes.
Right.
And that's just being a kid.
I think,
just because you jumped over a ditch once
doesn't mean you did parkour.
Okay. So,
but there were absolutely people who used to train gymnastics, and then they would go outside and they would see something, and we're talking like BC Greek, and they'd see something and they'd be like, "Hey, I went doing the pommel horse in the gym," and that is practically the same thing. And then they goof off on it, right? Now that I would say is the essence of parkour, is taking something that you've learned in an isolated environment and then extrapolating it and applying it to everywhere else.
To a challenge.
Right? It's like that's the essence of parkour. Mm-hmm. So I would be willing, if they were like, "Was this guy doing parkour?" I'd be like, "Well, what was it? What was his mindset? Was his mindset, I have this thing and I want to do this thing here because I just want to?" Then yeah, that was parkour. Absolutely. I would give that. But yeah, if you were like just out there running through the dishes, like chasing your dogs or whatever, that's not parkour. Your mindset wasn't there. I think we've talked about this before, right?
Yeah, we have talked about like the spirit and the discipline differences. But what I'm curious about carving out of you guys is if you think that it was it parkour before we called it parkour? And do the founders, which they're called, those original groups who promoted it and the name of it, own title to? What do they own title to? I know they own title to something, but what do they own? What's the breadth of that?
Would you? I guess that my answer would start off with like a question: is do people fighting hand-to-hand combat in 10,000 BC, would you call that martial arts?
I mean, it would be called I would call it martial arts. I might go a step further, and would it be kung fu, or would it be wushu, or would it be karate? that's a tough one.
That's tough, right?
Because it wouldn't be that name. You would be
It would
doing
be
that
that
thing.
style.
They might even beat them at what they're doing. That's the problem, right?
Yeah. So that's why I've always said, and this is just me personally, that free running is parkour.
Absolutely.
Because I would say, again, if they're doing hand-to-hand combat because they're just wrestling with each other in 10,000 BC, no, that's not martial arts. If they're studying how to be better at that, that is martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
If they're like, hey, let us wrestle so that the next time our tribes encounter each other, we are stronger
We
and
learn
better.
something. We train out.
Right? We train intentionally.
Mhm.
That's martial arts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, is it karate or is it TKD or wushu,
Mhm.
right? No, because the style hadn't been developed yet, right?
Right.
And there's those like template moves, right? But parkour has moves that are commonly associated with parkour, but I don't think are just tied to parkour,
Mhm.
right? Like you could do a Kong vault with a rifle. In fact, the military's been vaulting over walls for years with rifles. So why do we get to say that's inherently just parkour, right?
Mhm.
Sorry, tangent. My point being is like, if you're training with the intention, then that would be parkour.
Yeah, I think the thing that's unique about parkour is that we train the skills, the specific skills. So we train Kong, and we train Lachey, and we train wall runs, vaulting, and tic-tacs. And we have names for these moves where I don't think that is anything that has been defined in the past. Right?
Yeah, but I would almost
But what
say
if
that
it
we.
had?
I would
But,
say
Because
that
I
we.
do know
it could-
examples of this.
It could have died and just not been remembered. But I do think parkour, I would call anyone training jumping across gaps or swinging from branch to branch parkour. And if I just look all the way back in the past, if I saw some, because I would still call Gibbons the way they swing. I feel like it's parkour because it inspires me to do what they're doing and to
And they're
train
legit Lacheys.
those moves. So I would call anything back there parkour, but I do think parkour needs to be a little more specialized in the way that martial arts is that we call everything parkour right now, and it includes flips and it includes I don't even want to mention his name right now. What Pasha does, the moves that he has, it kind of gets included in there even though it doesn't have
really?
the intention, right?
I almost feel like.
I think parkour needs to be named and specialized in the way that gymnastics has events where it has bars and it has unparalleled bars and it has floor routines.
Whoa.
And it's
Whoa.
getting that way because we have skill, parkour, we have speed parkour, we have free running, we have style. So
And
it's getting there, and I think that those still fall under the word of umbrella, right? And I want to move. I personally hate that when people say someone isn't doing parkour because they did a flip. I think we're way past that now, way past that, right?
We should be.
We should be. So if we can get over that hurdle, then yeah, anything that someone did that was training to improve on it, training to improve a jump, or training to improve a vault, that should be included in parkour.
So I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, I
But
won't disagree.
I
with you.
want some clarification. So I would equate, and martial arts is just the easiest one, right?
Mhm.
Martial arts has literally tens of thousands of disciplines underneath it, right?
Truth.
That are styles,
Mhm.
we'll say. I think parkour and martial arts are of the equivalency categorization wise, right? Like if there's
True.
if you have like species and then you have race,
Yes.
kingdom, right? Like I think they're of the same category. And I think things like free running and tricking and these other disciplines fall under parkour, right? I would even say like Ninja Warrior stuff falls under parkour. I know it hurts to claim it. It hurts to claim it, okay? But I think it does, right? The same way, and that's okay that a lot of these people are like, well, we're nothing like those. They'd be like, yeah, TKD is nothing like Krav Maga, right? But they would both still say they are martial artists, right? So the same way that like somebody who's tricking and somebody who's doing Ninja Warrior will say like, well, we don't do the same thing at all. But the principles of what they do, which is like taking these elements and trying to bring these unique style, they inject themselves into their movement, is the essence of parkour.
Yeah, you're
right?
saying.
So you're saying something similar, right?
Yes.
We just need more of those little labels.
Yes, I do think parkour, because the name is so recognizable and sticks so well, and it's become such a a sensation. I do believe that it needs to broaden its the things that are underneath its umbrella.
So I think that I want to add some analogous stuff to that to martial arts, because it's interesting that you point that out, Jesse, because it truly has developed in a very similar way, where similar problems present, where people observe things about it and then they want to name it but they don't want to name it, and so on and so forth. So I think we're looking at that stuff as the same species but under a different genius, I think would be the anthropological term that we might start to split those out. I mean, we're looking at the difference between, we're all humans, but maybe you're Neanderthal and I'm Homo sapien and this guy's Denisovan.
Good.
I mean, you've got the beard.
Red. I'm not tall enough to be a Neanderthal.
I know. Yeah.
Oh, they were taller, eh?
Yeah, you're the Neanderthal.
Yeah, I mean, 23andMe says a little bit, but so there's that aspect in Chinese. I think. Parkour works this way too. Like, you might look at someone and you could use parkour as a verb.
Mm-hmm.
You could also use it as an adjective. And you could, or you could say someone has good parkour, blah blah blah. In Chinese, they have the term kung fu, right? We all know this term, but the term is not actually used to describe martial arts. Martial arts is wushu in Chinese. Kung fu or gong fu was a term that simply describes something that someone has done that includes hard work and skill. And if you want to get more specific, the word fu is the number 2 and the word for person. Mm-hmm. The word gong is like work and power. Li is power, gong and li. So it's work and power and skill when you break it down. In Chinese, when you say, oh, I practice gong fu, what you might mean that you do wushu, right? You might mean you go out and do the forms and do the fighting and stuff like that. But they would also say, oh, like if you do art, or art might be, it is used that way, but like a better stretch to understand would be like, if you're just really skilled at something, they could be like, oh, his art gong fu is really good, right? Mm-hmm. It would be a play on the word, but it doesn't sort of mean that. We see that happening with parkour. They were like, oh yeah, his Minecraft parkour is really good, right? It's not, right? We know that no one's doing parkour in Minecraft, right? But that's how it's used. So we see that term being used in different ways. So you would move, it can be both, is what I'm saying. It can evolve culturally, and still there's room for it, and it's understandable.
Yeah.
So it can evolve. It can evolve that way, like you're saying.
Yeah.
If you want more specificity, but that's the same thing as someone is saying. I think if we say kung fu, we need to really be saying wushu. You need to be saying taekwondo. You need to be saying the different northern, southern styles. You need to be saying those sort of.
Yeah, I just think it kind of simmers down the like argument that parkour gets, and the just the heated debates that we have over what can be called parkour and what's not. But it's just such a broad topic, and what we allow in there is broad topic. But it's like, it feels like there's just small segments that are like, because we had this debate when we did Orbit and Terra, and it was like, well, you guys are trying to rewrite parkour. You're trying to come up with your own name for it, and yes and no, but we just didn't want to have the debate with people online over what was parkour, right?
At that time, that was
because we wanted to teach stuff that was outside of what people considered parkour at that time, and we wanted to teach a class that was just on acrobatics, right? And that included tricking and breakdancing and free running. So yeah, I just think it needs more
delineation.
Yeah, very good.
So you're not proposing that it be renamed. I think you're just proposing that we allow subsets.
Yeah.
We allow for subsets.
Yep.
And then you can call it something different if you want, but you just acknowledge its history in that way.
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm interested in historically, is just looking at it and saying a lot of this argument about what we are and what we aren't comes from a very strict perspective of David Bell and the Yamakasi, because Sebastian was always more open to stuff, which is why free running came about as a term, right? Maybe he was the first one to do this, what you're talking about.
Yeah, so I do think that's where my idea would come from, is that because he had the same exact motivation for creating free running as we did for Terra and Orbit, and that he was just like, well, I want this to be a name that people can associate with and feel free to define as they want, right?
With this approach,
right?
Right.
And and he just didn't want to be
parkour
bound by the definition of this really strict pure parkour. So
right. and I think also they were at that time trying to create a language that would be more easily understood in like the UK, right?
Yeah.
So you have that, and then I would like to further liberate that opportunity by saying that if we imagine, as we try and draw a straight line, which I think is a little ethnocentric, back through method natural, then we're always going to be bound by this practicality being at the core of parkour. But if we can admit that the founders were heavily influenced by, at least maybe not Hollywood, but Hong Kong cinema, then we can leave room for this creative piece, because it was technically early digital content, even though it might not have been digital at that time, that had an influence on it.
Yeah, I would have to. How do we know?
Well, we know that in Julia Angel's book, Breaking the Jump, she interviewed the founders and said that their early influences were based on action movies and watching martial arts movies, and then reading about family who had practiced method natural, and so it may not have been 50-50.
You don't train method natural, and you don't train George Hubert's philosophy and get to where we are today. There needs to be something else added to it, right?
Yeah. That's kind of was going to be my coin, is that I do think that we and I've certainly been guilty of it, of saying that parkour is somehow inherently more practical than its alternatives. But the reality is it's not, never has been. What's practical is me learning how to run 10 miles, and I'm not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right? Because it's not fun. And so like that's the practical thing, is like I learned to run, and every half mile I do a vault, because that's probably realistic. If I had to run to Old Town right now, it would be a straight shot along Mulberry, and maybe I would jump a rail. So I think that the argument that we've always been about like practicality is maybe not that true. And that's okay. Like that's all right. Let's just be rid of this like straight edge philosophy that we keep trying to box ourselves in, when literally nobody who's in there, except for maybe one dude in a basement still watching like old early 2000s parkour videos, still believes that like parkour is about this like I've got to be strong to be useful thing. Like that sounds like CrossFit. Let's just let them have it.
It does, and it isn't that practical.
And let's let us just have fun and move, and that can all be parkour, right?
Yep.
I that's why I want to inject it more. I want to create not that space for dialogue with it, to say, hey, you know what? There were other influences. And if you know that, then you have that freedom. It breaks that up, because people are always going to double down, like you're saying. They're going to go back and be like, no, Belle Hébert. And you're going to be like, but those dudes were watching other stuff. Like they were inspired by other groups. It's like early breakdancers. If you go back and you watch their history, this is why I find these parallels with our stuff. It's so amazing. Is if you go back, and I was recently trying to dig into breakdance history, and it was like people in the Bronx who were trying to be seen because they didn't have a lot of mediums. They were poor, or they were just not being heard, and they wanted to be seen and recognized. So they start doing things that are outlandish and battling and showing each other up and doing essentially dance stunts, right, in order to be seen to some degree. And where did they gather their influence? They watch Hong Kong cinema. They'd go watch kung fu movies. They'd go watch different dancers like tap dance and jazz. They'd watch little movements from there, and they'd borrow a little bit, and they'd take it. This sounds a lot like someone trying to come up with a parkour line. You're going to watch a little other spot for some inspiration. It doesn't have a medium, doesn't have anything to do with you. They were watching capoeira. They were watching Hong Kong cinema. They were watching tap dancers, and they were learning how to be showmen from theater. And then they were going out, and they were presenting those authentic expressions in order to be seen. When I was a kid, before I had a video game that I wanted one time, and it wasn't out, or I couldn't buy it. So I just like cut out like drawings of the characters in the video game, and I'm like, right? That level of like,
it's sad.
That right, but it was just on a road trip. It wasn't like I was at home with like just a dirt floor or something like that, right? But you know what I mean? Like I'm just gonna do whatever I can to reinvent that scenario in my mind, and that's where I think what would have happened is something similar, like a lonely David Bell or Lamakaze were running around like, oh, let's train, let's do this thing. And then they're like, oh man, I was just get done watching Jackie and blah, blah, blah. Or like, oh, I was listening to a story about my dad training in this way or whatever, blah, blah, blah. They hear that and they just go outside. It's the same scenario as going out alone because you're probably bored. And I don't know if those guys were poor, but you're just like, let's face it, if you go out to train like that, you just don't have a lot going on, right? Like you're just left alone with your own ambition and like a school building, right? So, that's why I think we can be freed a little bit of that, like feeling that like everything's so freaking, like you're saying, like serious and practical.
Yeah. Well, and it's just, you know, if we just use the broad term of parkour and everything that the media represents it as, you are so free to do just about everything, right? Unless you're hitting another person.
Right.
And
that makes it
like
martial arts.
Martial arts. Or you're moving to music specifically for the rhythm, and now you're in dance. You're in parkour. And that's great. And you don't have to label it until it becomes something more. Or you feel like you have something that's unique enough that it deserves its own label. And in which case, that'll just happen on its own, right? And so if we just like it's parkour, and if you have this very unique like parkour and tap dance shoes, just to use the tap dance example, and that would be interesting, sure.
I'm
but
pretty sure
somehow,
Alex has done it.
It somehow becomes a thing, then you can label it, right? But otherwise, you just like be free, and you don't have to be like, oh, I'm not doing parkour because I got tap dance shoes on. You'd be like, well, people are doing parkour and they're barefoot, so are they not doing parkour? Or are they doing more real parkour?
Right.
Like, what is it, right? It's like, no, they're just doing parkour, and let the media represent it as just the big old sphere that is parkour.
And also this idea, I think that what you're pinning down is just this, that there needs to be this monolithic approach to parkour movement, right? You can have a little bit of something else in it, and it's not like, it doesn't have to be this monolith. You're not fixed to it. It has to be pure parkour in order to be practiced righteously.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm just saying that like parkour isn't one thing, and to say it's one thing is to lie to yourself and everybody that does parkour.
Parkour is not a monolith then.
Yeah, because it's like saying martial arts is just punching people in the face. You're like, well, no, that's actually boxing. And you'd be like, but are you punching with gloves or not gloves? Right? And now we got into these differences, and then you're like, okay, well, so it's just
it's a broader
it's
term.
just pointless. Yeah, to get into that debate, it's just it's the catch-all term, and it's great. Let's just own it. Let's just roll with it.
It gives you some freedom.
Yeah, and then it frees us, like you're saying, to watch things from early Hong Kong cinema or from wherever we may get it, right? From tribal dances in Africa, and be like, that's awesome. I want to include that in my practice and still be authentic to parkour.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to feel like by taking this thing and adding it to your movement practice that you've seen media-wise, that you're now being inauthentic to what you're doing.
Right.
And that's,
I get that a lot too, because I've been doing some
liberating
stuff
feeling.
and I have like some intention with like taking some b-boy and integrating with different ideas that I have. And then people are just like, oh, well, he's b-boying, he's not training parkour. I'm like, you don't know. You don't know what I'm scheming.
Yeah.
Right?
It's true. Any last words on that?
Yeah, Justin, what do you think? You agree or you still want want the genius of...
Well, because if I were to define, or if I were to line up my parkour training with the traditional definition of it, I've never done parkour. Right? I've always integrated it with things that were never practical or even linear, right? I was always doing flips, or I was doing breakdancing in the middle of it. I had windmill forever, and I've thrown that in parkour videos.
Yeah, and handstands. You've been
right. And handstands are definitely not like a parkour thing.
You've done the worm, which is breakdance.
Yeah, well, they are a parkour thing now. But
so yeah, that's I've just always had that, starting point. It's just like if you want to define parkour as something true, then I've never done it.
Except for maybe like one time where you're like, oh no, I got to get to class on time, and so you're running through a crowd of people through high school, and you climb up the railing to the second floor, and then you run to your class. That's about the closest to true parkour I've ever done.
And now we'll never be able to do it because Zoom school.
Because Zoom school, you'll never be able to run to class.
Yeah.
You'll still be late, but you won't have to run this time.
That's great.
That's funny. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. If you are listening to us on any of your major podcast platforms, you can also watch us on YouTube and reverse. If you're watching us on YouTube, thanks for tuning in and checking out our pretty faces. You can also listen to us on the go on any major podcast platform. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you next time.